Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Things have changed so fast, so dramatically this year, that it's hard to remember what a very different country this was on New Year's morning. Back then, a little over 7 months ago, the U.S. felt politically volatile. It definitely was. There was an election coming. But it still felt fundamentally American. There was no mistaking this country for any other country. We weren't Mexico or Luxembourg or Burundi. We definitely weren't China. Yes, most of our consumer goods did seem to be manufactured in Asia, but our way of life, our system, our society, seemed to be the very opposite of China's. The Chinese were enslaved. We were free. That was the difference, and it was permanent. It would never change. Not 1 in 1,000 Americans doubted that. In January, for example, Dr. Anthony Fauci, at the time not yet a household name, did an interview with the Journal of the American Medical Association to talk about America's response to the Wuhan coronavirus. Fauci explained the authoritarian measures the Chinese government had taken to contain that virus. Then Fauci noted, almost offhandedly, that in America, none of that would be allowed. Watch.
They've not only shut out the traffic out of Wuhan, planes, trucks, buses, ferries, rail, but they've done it to a number of the surrounding cities. So rather than say historically it doesn't do much good, which is true, I think it's important to wait and see that maybe the Chinese, because of the state of their society, that they're able to do that. I mean, as you well know, there's no chance in the world that we could do that to Chicago or to New York or to San Francisco.
As you well know, there is no chance in the world that we could do that to Chicago or to New York or to San Francisco. That's what Fauci said. Note his use of the word to. The Chinese government was doing these things to its people, not for them. In other words, these were punishments, not remedies. And none of that would ever be allowed here in a free country. It just couldn't happen in America. Fauci's words seem quaint now, like a fax machine or a black and white photograph. Fauci himself has since become one of the most strident advocates of a Chinese response to coronavirus, but he's hardly alone in that. Yesterday, the mayor of New York announced that he plans to erect armed checkpoints around the perimeter of the city and use plainclothes government agents to follow citizens to their homes. It would have been impossible to imagine any of that in January. Yet de Blasio's announcement didn't seem especially shocking. We're used to it now. That's how similar to China we have become. It's a big change. But like all seismic shifts, it happened incrementally before it happened overnight. For years, we watched our leaders prostrate themselves before the Chinese government. Most of us just assumed they were greedy. That's why they were doing it. China was paying their bills, so they bowed. We never imagined they actually admired the Chinese system. Oh, but they did. And that became clear with the arrival of the coronavirus. The first tip was their resolute refusal to admit where the virus came from. When strong evidence emerged from Chinese scientists that the disease originated in a lab in Wuhan, our leaders immediately and adamantly dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. They didn't want to know more. Their first instinct was to defend China. They didn't want the Chinese system discredited. That seemed confusing, but we soon learned why. The Democratic political activist Zeke Emanuel was among the first to reveal how the left planned to use the pandemic to change the United States. Here he is on MSNBC 4 months ago this week.
Realistically, COVID-19 will be here for the next 18 months or more. We will not be able to return to normalcy until we find a vaccine or effective medications. Is all that economic pain worth trying to stop COVID-19? The truth is, we have no choice.
Oh, the truth is we have no choice. Except in a democracy, we always have a choice. That's why it's different from an autocracy. In a democracy, on the big questions, the public gets to decide what the public wants. The people rule. That's the whole point of the American system. But the left had no plans to let the public decide anything. So instead, they issued resolute decrees. Remain at home. Wear a mask. Do not congregate with others. No one asked voters what they thought about any of this. Democracy played no role in it. The orders came down. Men with guns enforced the orders. The government used sophisticated technology to track down anyone who disobeyed them. just like in China. Here's Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti.
This has really been marvelously embraced by 99.9% of people. We see it in the traffic data, we see it in the cell phone data, but we're going to hunt down that last 0.1% and say, you got to get inside, you got to cut it out, and you got to distance.
Oh, most people obey, but, quote, we're going to hunt down the last 1%. In other words, no dissent of any kind allowed, just like in China. In China, the government loads disobedient citizens into trucks and carts them away. We have video of that happening. In Los Angeles, they just starve you out. They take away your water and your electricity.
These large parties are unsafe and can cost Angelenos their lives. That is why tonight I am authorizing the city to shut off Los Angeles Department of Water and Power Service in the egregious cases in which houses, businesses, and other venues are hosting unpermitted large gatherings.
Recognize that? In some ways, all authoritarian societies are the same. They are characterized by corruption, a lack of social trust, and a deep cynicism about government. All those attitudes are endemic in China. Suddenly, they are nearly universal in this country. The public understands that our leaders are lying to us. Politicians use lockdowns for political ends. In the name of public health, they reward supporters and they punish their opponents. They're barely hiding this anymore. They've done it since day one, but most of us wrongly assumed that our Bill of Rights would prevent them from going too far. That was our backstop against tyranny, but we were wrong. The Bill of Rights has not prevented them from doing precisely what they want to do. In state after state, governors, for example, have targeted the faithful on the assumption that most traditional Christians do not vote Democrat, therefore they must be punished. Now, banning the exercise of religion is unconstitutional. Obviously, it's a direct violation of the letter and the spirit of the First Amendment. It's never happened before, but they have made it happen. They've done it anyway. As in China, our government has enthusiastically persecuted Christians. Here's New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy explaining. You have closed church services and synagogue services and arrested people for attempting to attend them. Did anyone say that maybe practicing your faith might be important to someone's mental health?
Listen, I think we've had a very good common ground with faith leaders of literally every faith who understand this.
So listen carefully. Governor Murphy says he has reached agreement with those faith leaders who, quote, understand this. He doesn't say anything about the faith leaders who, quote, don't understand this, the leaders who'd instead like to worship their God as the Constitution guarantees they can. There's no common ground for them. They will be arrested just as they are in China, nor can they fight back. In a free society, self-defense is the most basic right. All other rights rest upon it. Self-defense is illegal in China, and suddenly it's illegal in this country too. The Democratic Party's militia loot stores, deface our cities, attack people with impunity. They are rarely punished for doing it. Yet Americans who try to protect their families from the violence face the full rage of the state. They risk going to jail. They have been indicted. As in China, there are now two standards of justice. The party has decided who can be armed. Everyone else must submit. It wasn't always this way in the United States. In fact, until recently, we had a functioning constitution. But anyone who remembers that is a threat to the state. History itself is a threat to the state. In China, there is no history. Like religion, the past is purely a political tool to be shaped by temporal leaders seeking to protect their power. In place of God, the state offers secular cults in which citizens worship party-approved political martyrs. Doesn't sound very American, but suddenly it is.
We are here to honor George Floyd. For those who wish to, we will now kneel for our moment of silence.
Anyone who challenges the cult, who refuses to join it, who won't kneel before it, is punished. And then their complaints are scrubbed from the permanent record. China does this. Chinese censors scour the internet to make certain dangerous ideas never reach the public. Does that sound familiar to you? That's where our tech oligarchs learned it. The United States, in other words, very clearly is becoming very much like China at very high speed. It doesn't mean the two countries are identical. There's still real differences between them. In China, for example, leaders still think beyond the next election. They don't have real elections, so they can take a long-term view. And in China, they understand that countries in which the population is divided against itself, countries in which citizens have nothing meaningful in common with one another, are weak countries. And over time, countries like that are doomed. And so China emphatically rejects identity politics. It's illegal there. Leaders in China don't narrowcast to tiny constituencies based on their, quote, identity. The idea is appalling to them. The Chinese focus instead on national identity. They don't worship diversity, they promote unity. And that's why long-term, they believe they will win. The Chinese also believe, and this is another striking difference, that their economy is worth saving. They didn't destroy it with coronavirus quarantines, harsh as they were. Unlike the United States, China was a poor place until fairly recently. And so they know firsthand that poor countries are powerless, and they don't want that. In other words, the Chinese care about themselves and their future. And that's one thing we could actually learn from them, but we don't seem to be. Chris Bedford is a senior editor at The Federalist. He joins us tonight. We're happy to have him. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. Do you notice the wholesale, countrywide change in attitudes, at least among our leaders, but not exclusively among them, in the last 7 months?
Yes, especially.
Yes. Measures.
Especially in the last 7 months.
All of a sudden, we resemble what we said we hated.
And they've been laying the groundwork for that for a while. To your end point, our American left is different from a lot of the global illiberal lefts in that they're the only ones that don't like their country. The Cubans, the Soviets, the Chinese, they're all fiercely patriotic. We don't have that, but we have a lot of the other things. We have that insidious phrase that you're on the wrong side of history. Our Silicon Valley and our tech giants built a lot of the technology that the Chinese are now using to oppress their people. The New York Times to Barack Obama have praised the Chinese system to pass some of their ordinances like the New Green Deal and what they think is absolutely essential. And we're seeing it more and more. And now we're seeing their foot soldiers, which the Chinese used, Mao used, to really instill fear and make everyone know in China that not a single person was above the law, to attack institutions you thought were untouchable, whether it was the founders, and then it got to the saints. It starts off with tearing down Catholic saint statues and desecrating churches, but before you know it, places like the Washington Post are attacking my neighborhood priest, Monsignor Pope. And we're talking in L.A. with Garcetti. They're going to turn off the power. They're saying they're going to go after parties. They're going to go after churches and places that refuse to shut down. Places like Harvest Rock that are suing the state of California and saying that they have a right to gather, a First Amendment right to gather, just like the protesters do. It's a double standard completely. It's a new system.
We're going to spend a lot of the rest of tonight's show in specific ways comparing the way America is evolving to the way China is. But I want to get back, because I think it's a really interesting and smart point, to what you said at the outset, that the difference between the revolutionaries in our country and in, say, China or Cuba or pick a country, is that the American left hates its own country. So what's that look like long term? How can people who hate a country run it?
I don't think they can. I think that, unfortunately, if they were to win, if the illiberal left were to win, and those who are very much against the liberties that we cherish, pick and choose were to win, and at the same time hate our country, it's going to be difficult for this republic to stand. We were warned very clearly by the geniuses that came together and designed this system that it's a very unstable system. It relies on a culture that is united. It relies on people who are moral. It relies on a republic. Right now, we're moving closer and closer to mob rule, to corporatist technocratic rule, run by people who think this country is evil at its core and are trying to divide us in a way that you pointed out. China's not divided. A country that's divided like that is going to have a difficult time standing. And I worry about that because people say, well, what happens if this election goes this way or that election goes that way? I don't know if Republicans and Democrats, either party, are capable of dealing with these. It's going to be up to us on the local level, the churches, the civil organizations that they're targeting right now, because they know those are the only chance we have of resisting this kind of uprising.
It's pretty easy to destroy things. You divide people. That's the first step. But for them to endure, there has to be some common purpose or identity. You have to be united in something. And I don't hear anybody thinking through what what that is. Chris Bedford, I really
Even the
appreciate you
anthem.
coming on. Even the anthem, especially.
Thank you,
the anthem.
Tucker.
Well, mobs of people, really a coalition of the unhappy, is tearing down statues, desecrating monuments. But that destruction is more than simply symbolic. It's a deliberate effort to erase history, to separate us from our past and its useful lessons, and distract from the problems that are affecting Americans today. In Chicago, for example, where more than 50 people have been shot with guns this week, politicians are now moving to erase American history altogether. State Representative LaShawn Ford is calling on the Illinois State Board of Education to abolish all history classes in all schools statewide, claiming that teaching American history leads to racism. Jason Hill is the author of the book We Have Overcome. He's a professor at DePaul University in Chicago, and we're happy to have him on tonight. Professor, thanks so much for coming on. So, eliminating all history. Explain, if you will, what you think the idea is behind this.
Well, thank you for having me again, Tucker. I think what we're seeing in the educational system is systemic nihilism. So let's go back a step further. A couple weeks ago, Rutgers University declared that grammar was racist. Now, grammar is a science that deals with the proper method of oral and written communication. When you attack grammar, you attack language, which is the method of cognition. So you attack man's mind. You attack his ability to reason.
Yes.
So you attack man's mind, which means you leave us on the level of grunting farm animals. So you leave us incapacitated to reason, to think, and then you take away his history. You take away human history. You take away our constitutional rights, our Bill of Rights, our Second Amendment, our First Amendment, or time-worn principles that we use to defend our way of life, or Judeo-Christianity. You're looking at systemic nihilism. You're looking at the Antichrist, as far as I'm concerned. You're looking at a bunch of nihilists and anarchists that want to destroy a system and replace it with nothing. Nothing at all. They want to destroy the good for the sake of it being the good. I have been warning, I have talked about this on your show, that these postmodern nihilists that started from back in the 60s when we had these fake disciplines attacking reason, valorizing feelings as the only criteria for adjudicating disputes, one's feelings and one feeling of being offended as the only criterion for adjudicating disputes, and dispensing with reason, objective reality, and logic as the construct of imperialist, racist white men. That's what we're seeing today. And so you dispense with history altogether.
I'm transfixed by what you just said. I hope that this finds its way onto the internet and is viewed by many, Professor, because I think you just put it as crisply as I've ever heard it, what's happening. And it's as scary as you say it is. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I hope you keep teaching for a long time.
Thank you.
Christianity is under attack in this country, not the Episcopal Church, but actual Christianity. Churches are closed, rioters are burning Bibles in the streets. We're not connecting the dots, probably because we don't want to, but that doesn't make it any less real. It is real. Eric Metaxas is here on that next. Since the day it was founded, the United States has been a refuge for people from around the world to worship their gods as they choose. That's precisely why so many of our first European settlers came here. When they wrote our Constitution, in the first amendment to the Bill of Rights, they explicitly protected religious freedom, unlike countries around the world, particularly like China, which openly persecute Christians. Unfortunately, America, as we noted in the last block, is becoming much more like what we say we hate, the government of China. Many states have canceled in-person church services under the pretext of protecting the rest of us from the Wuhan coronavirus. Places like New Jersey and California consider Christianity, quote, non-essential, unlike abortion clinics or liquor stores, lotto ticket kiosks. None of this is related to science, of course. It's about punishing people they don't think vote for them. And if you don't believe it, ask the rioters. They were allowed to burn a stack of Bibles in Portland, Oregon last weekend. Try that with a Quran and see how long you remain free. You'd be in prison immediately. Bibles, no problem. Why? because Democratic leaders in Congress despise traditional Christians because they don't vote for them. Here's House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn explaining his view on Fox.
Well, I don't know anything about burning Bibles.
That's another thing that's out there.
Everybody's got their own religion. And I know the Quran, I know the Bible, both New and Old Testaments very well. And so just because somebody may believe in the Quran, that's their business. So burning a Bible doesn't do anything about burning down a federal building. I don't know if I've seen it. Maybe you all know something I don't know. What federal building has been under threat?
What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything, but we'll tell you what it isn't, and that's a clear declaration of disapproval of rioters burning Bibles. And if you can't say that, there's probably a reason you can't say that. What is that reason? Eric Metaxas has thought through it. He's the author of the book, If You Can Keep It. We're happy to have him on tonight. Eric, thanks so much for coming on. Why is it so hard for our Democratic leaders to say unequivocally, I'm against attacks on churches, I'm against torching Bibles, and why is it so hard for Republican leaders to do anything about it?
It's ignorance, Tucker. Clyburn reminds me of Biden. He's sort of like a career politician, an animated waxworks dummy who has no idea of our history. He just wants to cling to power. He hasn't thought it through. He has no idea, just like maybe 50 years of Americans have no idea. We've forgotten that freedom is utterly impossible on the American model without the values we got from the Bible. It doesn't mean we can force people to be Christians or anything absurd like that, but the point is all the founders understood that the Bible wasn't just a sacred book for some people. It was what gave us the West and what led to the idea of freedom and self-government. And when you attack that, you're not just attacking a few people who believe in that book. You're attacking foundational ideas that most of our, certainly career politicians, have no clue about anymore.
So Christianity, among other things, limits the excesses of the state. This is why all authoritarian governments hate it, because when your population worships an actual God, that suggests that you are not God, and there are some things that you can't do. So without it, there's nothing they can't do. Isn't that the whole point?
Well, that is precisely the point. Look, say Jesus is Lord in China, or try it in North Korea. Try it in CHOP or CHAZ or whatever it was called. There are certain things that are so fundamentally threatening. The Bible and people who say, I have a higher authority than the state. I will bow to nothing but the God that I worship. Those people are tremendously frightening to authoritarian leaders. Hitler was one of them. He played patty cake with the church until the gloves came off, and he made it very clear that those people are the enemy. They're my real threat, and if I can defang them, but if I can take power, then they will be utterly defanged. And if I can kind of keep them quiet for now. So any Christians who are not absolutely, and I don't mean just Christians, any patriotic Americans, any people who understand the role faith has played in our history, if you do not stand up and push back with everything you have against the idea that we can be a secular nation will ultimately be China. It'll be a place where the Faucis of this world will and can tell you what to do by force. And when people are burning Bibles and American flags, you might as well be cutting your hands off. These are the two things that have created more human flourishing, that have lifted human dignity on a level we've never seen in the history of the world. Those are the two things. If you're burning those things, something suggests to me that you don't understand that.
Yeah. And we should also say they went after, in a big way, the Orthodox in New York and New Jersey who persisted in worshiping their God.
Of course.
And they were arrested for it in some cases. Eric Metaxas, thank you so much.
No question. Thank you.
Well, politically motivated prosecutions are a hallmark of banana republics. Now it's coming here, courtesy of the New York State Attorney General and the Governor, Andrew Cuomo. The Attorney General of New York has decided to use her powers to destroy a political group that she doesn't like, the National Rifle Association. We'll tell you how and why she's doing that next. It wasn't that long ago, you may in fact remember it, that the IRS under Barack Obama was forced to apologize for targeting, harassing, persecuting conservative nonprofits. It took several lawsuits because they kept lying about it, but the IRS finally was forced to admit the obvious, that they were doing it and that it's wrong. You shouldn't target organizations because you disagree with their political beliefs. That's corruption. So we might have a new administration soon. It won't be run by Joe Biden if he wins. Obviously, it'll be controlled by the same people who went after conservative groups under Barack Obama. They will be in charge. So what will they do once they are? Well, we have a preview tonight, thanks to the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. The NRA, James has decided, must be destroyed immediately.
Just a few minutes ago, my office filed a lawsuit against the National Rifle Association to dissolve the organization in its entirety.
It's hard to overstate how third world this lawsuit is. The Attorney General is alleging that the National Rifle Association must be destroyed because it's getting too involved in politics, which, of course, it's allowed to do legally. She's also upset about what she calls self-dealing. Not clear exactly what that means. Even before James took office in 2019, she promised to bring down the president. Show me the man and I'll find you the crime, Stalin supposedly once said. James is from that school. We got some insight into who provides her marching orders thanks to a separate lawsuit the NRA filed against her. The NRA says that her predecessor, a top Democrat by the name of Eric Schneiderman, remember him? He had to leave because of personal problems. He admitted that he was pressured by, quote, powerful political interests to bring a major lawsuit against the NRA. Why? Because Democrats blamed the NRA for Trump's win 4 years ago. And by the way, they did help get Donald Trump elected. The NRA has for decades been the single most effective get-out-the-vote late campaign operation the Republicans have. And this year they were planning apparently to spend up to $70 million helping Republicans. Now they won't. Why? Because they've been sued. So defensively, they will probably hold back a lot of that money for their legal defense. So if you wanted to short-circuit Republicans in November's election, you would go after the NRA, and that's exactly what they've done. Now, there's one person we know who is not troubled by all of this, and that's Joe Biden.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period. 150 million people have been killed since 2007, more than all the wars, including Vietnam, from that point on. Carnage on our street, and I want to tell you, if I'm elected and I'm coming for you and gun manufacturers, I'm going to take you on.
He's an idiot, of course. The facts were wrong. But the point remains. They will disarm you if you don't support them politically. That is the plan, just as in China. And this is the first step. Seth Barron is Associate Editor of Political Journal. He has a good sense of what the Attorney General of New York is up to. He joins us tonight. Seth, thanks so much for coming on. What, are you allowed in the United States, if you just refresh my memory because things are changing fast, if you're the government, to shut down your political opposition with lawsuits? Can you do that?
Well, I don't think you're supposed to. I think that kind of goes against the spirit of the law, perhaps not the letter. They seem to do that pretty well. But what I think Tish James is really up to is, I think you're right that it is an attack on it's an electorally based attack, but also it's a major distraction from the fact that shootings have gone up radically in New York City in the last few months. This is a typical diversion attempt to blame the shootings on someone other than the bad ideas of Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Andrew Cuomo and the Democrat Party. In the last few months, they've let thousands of people out of jail. They've changed the law, so basically no one gets remanded on bail. They've essentially sat on the police and made it impossible for them to do their jobs effectively. And as a result, gangs are involved in just this spate of violence all over Brooklyn, the Bronx, Upper Manhattan, and shootings are up like 200% in New York City. So I think a lot of this is, whenever this happens in Chicago or D.C. or New York,
the local leaders blame the NRA and responsible gun owners. And they say, oh, there's an iron pipeline of guns coming into our cities. But magically, they only go off when they get into the cities.
So the NRA exists to preserve your right to defend your family from violence. If you have leaders who are simultaneously encouraging violence and then working to prevent you from defending yourself against it, you should be concerned, shouldn't you be?
I think you should be very concerned. There's a lot of violence on the streets of New York right now. Robberies are up, assaults are up, knifings are up. So, yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, ideally everyone would be armed. New York City has very strict gun laws, but it doesn't seem to be stopping it.
Yeah, I would say just the opposite. Seth Barron, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So Bill de Blasio is famously maybe the most inept mayor in the United States. Part of the way that manifests itself is he often makes promises he can't keep. He tells others to do things he wouldn't do himself. Many examples of this. The latest from yesterday, a reporter asked the mayor about the mandatory implicit bias training. Those are the brainwashing sessions, ubiquitous across America now, that NYPD officers have to take. Now, we're told this is necessary to guard against a scourge of microaggressions. Our elected leaders tell us as businesses are burned to the ground that we must attend these sessions. So do you go yourself? That was the question of Bill de Blasio. And here's how he responded.
You've often talked about the implicit bias training that members of the NYPD have to go through. I'm wondering if you have done that same training or your team at City Hall to address your own implicit biases and to learn how, you know, those micro and macro aggressions impact your own behavior and decision making.
I think it's something that every one of us should be thinking about all the time. It's certainly a conversation that Charlene and I have had for years, Bridget, about how this society has coded us all in very negative ways that have to be weeded out. That's part of why we also will be very soon instituting a commission on racial justice and reconciliation to formally identify the racist realities in so many of our institutions.
Man. This guy can't get an MSNBC show soon enough. But if you listen carefully, of course, the answer is no. Bill de Blasio doesn't go to implicit bias training, because why would he? Because he doesn't need it, because unlike you, he's a good person. The funny thing is that back in 2016, in a conversation with Hillary Clinton, Bill de Blasio uttered a phrase that would get everyone else in America fired, but certainly sent to implicit bias training. Here's what he said.
I just have to say, thanks for the endorsement, Bill. Took you long enough.
Sorry, Hillary. I was running on CP time.
Oh, Bill de Blasio. Examine your privilege. But of course he won't. That's for you to do. Well, next up, a teenager in the LA County jail system was prescribed estrogen in an effort to control his behavior. Think about that. Speaking of China, his lawyer joins us next to explain what happened and why. Officials at the Los Angeles County Juvenile Detention Center forced a 16-year-old inmate to take estrogen in order to change and modify his behavior. Hard to believe that happened, but apparently it did. Wesley Uchi is a civil rights attorney. He's representing the teenager in the suit, and we're happy to have him tonight. Mr. Uchi, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us how this happened, why it happened, if it's ever happened before. It sounds almost impossible to believe.
Yes. So my client was a 16-year-old male who was detained downtown near downtown Los Angeles at the juvenile hall. And about 2 days after he first came and arrived there, he was seen by doctors without his parents' permission, and they, for whatever reason, decided to diagnose him with a condition called oppositional defiant disorder, otherwise known as ODD. And there was no psychology test done, there was no psychiatric testing done, And the problem is that oppositional defiant disorder is otherwise a psychological issue that needs that type of testing. And what exactly happened was they came down with that diagnosis, and on the same day they prescribed him a dosage of estrogen. And they never told his parents or him that they were going to make him take it. And the theory is that with ODD, it's associated with higher levels of testosterone, which is also correlated with higher levels of delinquency. And so we believe in this lawsuit that he was prescribed on the same day this level of estrogen in order to counteract his testosterone, which they deemed was elevated at the time. The problem is that that's an unfounded medical treatment. There's no scientific proof that that exists. And what makes it even worse is that they refused to tell him what they were forcing him to take. And when he refused to take the medication, saying, I'm not going to take this medication, you haven't told me what it is, they told him he couldn't refuse. And because he had a pending juvenile delinquency case, he felt that if he continued to refuse, it would have a negative impact on the ultimate result or punishment he was going to receive from the juvenile court.
And so this, he believes, you believe, caused him to grow breasts.
Yes. So immediately after taking the medication, he developed a condition called gynecomastia. And what that is the growth of the tissue in the breast region. And essentially what happened was, all the kids at the juvenile hall noticed immediately and were making fun of him when they were showering or when they would have to go out to exercise, go to the pool, to go to PE. His parents, who visited him on a regular basis, all noticed right away that there was some type of growth on his chest. And being a 16-year-old male who's already pretty self-conscious and trying to get used to his developing body. Yes.
Well, it's grotesque, and it's also a metaphor for what they're doing to the country, right? They hate testosterone above all else. I wish we had more time, Ms. Giudice. This is a remarkable story. I'm taking your word that it's true, but I just have never heard anything like it, and I hope this is the only time it's ever happened, and I hope you prevail. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. A major city is on the verge of completely gutting its police department. We're learning now that that's just the beginning of the changes they plan. It's hard to read these scripts and think it's real, but it is real, and we'll have details after the break. Things are becoming more radical in Seattle, not less. The city council there moving forward on a plan to cut 100 officers this year, with hundreds more set to be chopped next year. A full vote on the proposal is coming up next week. Jason Rantz is a radio host in Seattle following this closely. He joins us tonight. Jason, will this happen?
Yes, it's almost certainly going to happen on Monday. Just to give some context, we have about 1,300 officers right now in Seattle. We need to have about double that for the size of Seattle. So instead of actually investing in police officers, they're going to cut up to 100 in the coming weeks. The vote takes place on Monday. They're going to be getting rid of school resource officers because, God forbid, we actually protect students. They're going to get rid of some SWAT team members because, well, I guess we don't need them given we've had many mass shootings over the course of the last few years. And most alarmingly, because you and I have been talking about the homelessness crisis here, they're going to completely gut something called the navigation team. This is a specialized group of officers and social workers who go into homeless encampments filled with human waste and use needles, and they connect these folks with shelter. They don't allow them to just camp out wherever they want to camp out. And because they remove these encampments, the council has decided that's inhumane. It's more humane to keep them living in their own filth. And so the homelessness crisis is going to get a lot worse here in Seattle. And while we're having a surge in gun violence like the rest of the country, that's likely going to get worse as well.
Dark forces have descended. Very quickly, is anyone standing up against this in local government?
No, not in local government. But what we are having this Sunday, there's going to be a pro-police rally. Usually conservatives and pro-cop folks don't attend these rallies because we have jobs and lives and responsibilities, unlike the left. And so we're actually going to get together this Sunday. And hopefully enough people will come out there to tell the council they're on the wrong side of this. There are 3 polls that just came out saying exactly the same thing, that we don't back a 50% cut in the SPD. We'll just see whether or not they're actually going to listen to the right side this time.
Man, they tried that in Colorado and people got hurt. So good luck. Be careful. Jason Rantz, thank you. We are out of time. We'll be back tomorrow night. The show that is now and always the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Standing by from New York City, which stands still, is the great Sean Hannity.
No, New York City, which means you're stupid to live here.